just want to give a quick update, I suppose, on where the Commonage action is at, I suppose, in acres. So I'm having a problem here. I just can't seem to move on the, no, perfect. So just to give a quick run through the Commonage action in acres. So I suppose it's important just to point out a few of the basics, we'll say, of on the acres side first. So I suppose Commonage was a mandatory action in acres. So that meant that all owned, rented or leased Commonage that was on an applicant's or participant's BP 22 BPS came into acres. And I suppose that's important because I suppose that forms then the base unit value of the eligible Commonage area going forward into acres. And I suppose there has been a number of questions on withdrawing parcels of Commonage and adding on parcels of Commonage, etc. So I suppose it ties into the second point here, in that I suppose Commonage was one of the actions that gained tier 1 access to the scheme. So if a participant had greater than 0.5 of a hectare declared in 21 BPS and continued to farm that in 22, that gained that participant tier 1 access into the scheme. And I suppose that would have implications. There has been circulars issued, I suppose, just clarifying or outlining or reminding, I suppose, people just of the consequences of withdrawing action. So in the case of Commonage being your only tier 1 action under acres, and if that Commonage is withdrawn or dropped off the annual BIS application, then that could mean that your only tier 1 action is lost, and therefore have consequences for penalties for that year for the rest of the acres payment. So I suppose it's just important to note that. The couple of eligibility conditions, I suppose, that were built in there to the Commonage side of things. So there is a minimum stocking rate requirement, and that was I suppose built on the min figure that was there under the Commonage management plan process in GLAS. And I suppose it's important to say that that will be subject to review by the CP teams. When they get the results of the assessment, they will have the ability to review those min figures based on that assessment. The other key, I suppose, condition that was in there on the Commonage side of things is that any acres participant shareholder will say there is an agreement there not to hinder or block any works. So these would be, I suppose, landscape action works that may be proposed by a Commonage management group on these Commonages following assessment. There may be works, we'll say, proposed. Now, it doesn't mean to say that every shareholder has to take part in the works, but I suppose that there is part of being an acres shareholder would mean that there is an agreement there not to hinder or block any works that are proposed on that. And I suppose in the CP zones, as Aidan mentioned there already about the NPIs and landscape actions, there is additional actions then applicable to aid habitat restoration on the Commonage areas. So just a couple of wee bits just on the stats. I suppose there's just over 10,000 herd owners with Commonage in acres tranche 1, with a claimed area of in excess of 268,000 hectares and an average claim area of 27 hectares of Commonage. So I suppose just a small bit now on the let me see, I've lost my screen again now. So just a small bit of how the Commonages are going to be approached, we'll say. So the Commonages greater than 10 hectares and some of the smaller Commonages, so some of the Commonages less than or equal to 10 hectares in the CP zones, they're going to be all assessed by the CP teams. And I suppose the CP teams have already commenced that work in some areas, and I suppose they'll continue with that process now throughout the summer. And that results-based score then will inform, obviously, the annual payment then that's that's arrived at for each shareholder in that commonage. As I said before, there, following that assessment too, there may be a revision of the individual minimum stocking rates. So in other words, if the assessment shows up certain areas of commonage that require either a higher min or we'll say a revised min on that side of things, well, they will be able to put that forward, and that will kick in then as the revised minimum requirement for that. I suppose it's important to say that it's just the CP, the commonages, we'll say, in the CP zone that the CP teams currently are assessing. There is currently a tender up on the e-tenders for the scoring of the non-CP commonages. So there's somewhere in the region of 64,000 hectares of non-CP commonages that have to be scored and assessed to, and will follow the same process as the CP ones. And I suppose that tender is up on e-tenders at the minute, and the closing date for that tender is tomorrow, I think. So just a little bit more on the CP team's role, I suppose. There is now a dedicated acres commonage portal, we'll say, and that acres commonage portal will have every CP commonage currently, every CP commonage parcel is in on that acres commonage portal. The CP teams will go in, and similar to what's happening on the enclosed, the non-commonage land, we'll say, they will go in, assign scorecards to those commonage parcels, and then they will continue to do their field assessment and populate the scorecards based on that. I thought it important too, just to mention, because I suppose there has been a lot of discussion on it over the last few weeks about the turbary and the effect that active turbary would have on the commonage assessment. So I suppose there is now a dedicated protocol in place for the CP teams for assessing active turbary and commonage. So that protocol will mean that the active turbary area will be assessed separately to the remainder of the commonage parcel, and we'll say it will be assigned its own scorecard area and assessed separately, and then the payment then will be made on the combined non-turbary and turbary commonage parcels. So the results then of all of the scoring and the management advice that will be arriving out of that scoring, we'll say, on the scorecards, will be sent to farmers there, or shareholders, acres shareholders, we'll say, in those commonages then in due course, whenever that work has been complete. You can understand there's a fair volume of work involved in landscape action in conjunction with the CP teams. So any commonage where a group of shareholders can come together, the CP teams will facilitate this. There will be additional payments onto the landscape action heading for that, and I suppose that's all with the aim of proposing works or restoration works or different types of actions there to address any issues that have been shown up as part of the scoring, with the aim of improving the score over time, and I suppose ultimately improving the payment that'll derive out of that score over time. So I suppose for yourselves then as advisors, I suppose this is the bit I suppose that will, so following, we'll say, the CP teams will look and assess all of the commonage parcels that are in that commonage portal, we'll say. They will decide which of the smaller commonage parcels, so the commonage parcels less than or equal to 10 hectares, they will decide which ones of those they will assess and score as part of the scoring process, because I suppose it's important practically. Some of these smaller commonage parcels could be part of and just adjacent to a larger commonage complex, and it's important, I suppose, that they're not treated in isolation. So the CP teams will be looking at that. They will decide which of those smaller Commonage parcels they want to score, and then the remainder then, I suppose, if it's not scored by the CP teams, the remainder then will require a Commonage farm plan to be prepared by yourselves, the farm advisor, we'll say. And I suppose that Commonage farm plan will include a provision to include, we'll say, all activities, we'll say, that might be required on those smaller areas, like habitat restoration or vegetation control. And I suppose it hasn't, because the assessment process by the CP teams, I suppose, is just starting on the Commonages, so we don't have a deadline yet as to when this Commonage farm plan will have to be submitted, but we will make yourselves, the advisors, aware of this, I suppose, through circular when the Commonage farm plan has been finalised and when the date for submission has been decided on. And I suppose the proposal is that that Commonage farm plan will be uploaded. It'll be a document that will be uploaded onto the Acres Ag Schemes platform, similar to the documents that were uploaded at the time of application, maybe for rare breeds or for soil samples, or any document that has to be uploaded in conjunction with the application. And I suppose, again, as I said, landscape actions can be applied for on these smaller Commonage parcels too, even where it hasn't been scored by the CP teams. Landscape actions can be applied for on these within the CP zones. So just a short, I suppose, I thought it worthwhile putting up a slide just on the payments again. It's there in the specification anyway, but I suppose no harm to mention it, that look at, I suppose, it's payments start proper, I suppose, in anything that scores a 4 or greater, but there is a participation payment in there set at €50 per hectare in the first 20 hectares. So I suppose that was put in there as an incentive to try to incentivize participation, or maximum participation, I suppose, of shareholders, we'll say, in the Commonage, because ultimately, I suppose, the more Commonage shareholders, Acres Commonage shareholders we have, we stand a better chance of trying to get Commonage management groups formed and maybe get agreement on habitat restoration works and that on it. And I suppose just on those smaller Commonage parcels, anything 10 hectares or less, we'll say there is a flat rate payment on those of €120 per hectare. So that's just a quick run through on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Aidan. Good overview of Commonage there at the moment. There's a lot of work to be done yet on it. CP teams will be busy with their element of scoring too. So again, as I say, we'll leave the questions and answers until the end, that if there's anything there that's outstanding, put them onto that Q&A box. Next up in the agenda then we have Caroline O'Sullivan, and she's going to give an overview of, I suppose, the function of the scorecards from the perspective of biodiversity improvement, ecological integrity. So Caroline, are you able to switch on your camera? Or sound, Caroline?
Yeah, sorry, John.
Yeah, that's okay. I thought I was on my own here.
No.
Okay. Okay, perfect. We can see that, Caroline.
Great. Morning all. Thanks for listening in. I'm just going to talk through the scorecards. Some of you will have attended training already, and all of you will have attended training by June 13th, not July 13th. So I'm just going to talk through some of the things that you'll likely hear again in the training, but just kind of how the scorecards are set up and what scorecards we're using. So the scorecards support a results-based approach. Sorry now, just trying to get things out of my way. Scorecards are integral to the results-based approach, and they're designed to provide signals for farmers for things that could be better and therefore help improve scores and associated payments. all field scores with scorecards in acres can yield scores from 0 to 10, and scores of 0, 1, 2, and 3 will receive no payment. So you have to go above and beyond a score of 0, 1, 2, or 3 in order to get a payment from acres. And scores of 4 or more will receive a payment. Now, the basis of the main acre CP payment will come from the scores on the scorecard. So the €7,000 that is available, hopefully a good chunk of that will go to farmers through their scorecard assessments, and for some farmers all of the 7,000 will go through their scorecard assessment, depending on the size of the farm. Farmers can keep doing what they're doing this year and take signals from the field scores as to what can be done to improve for the next assessment. So I suppose there's a lot of people asking at the moment, what can't I do and what should I change? There's no need for the farmers to change anything. Topping and cutting later might help the field scores, but they don't have to do that. That's a key thing. And then non-productive investments are available to help farmers in acre CP in particular to improve scores where appropriate. So if field boundaries are poor, the hedgerow planting may be suitable and you can apply for it as an NPI. If field boundaries are moderate, then hedgerow rejuvenation is an NPI that might be suitable in order to improve the score by the next assessment. If grazing is poor, because maybe the field is undergrazed and the farmer can't graze it more because it's not stock proof, then fencing and gates are available as NPIs through acre CP as well. So there are lots of options there, and we will spend, when the final list of NPIs and landscape actions are available, we'll talk you through all those in detail. The scorecard highlights issues, and the farmer can then choose to address them if they want to, but it isn't mandatory, and I suppose that's really important to highlight. There's nothing that has to be done from a CP team perspective, and nothing is mandatory and nothing has to change if it doesn't suit. The CP teams will work with the farmer and the advisor to improve the scores and associated payments where possible though. So there are 10 scorecards in acres, and 3 of these will be used across acres general and CP. There's the Grassland card, the low input Grassland on Peat card, and the Peatland card if the farmer has Commonage, will be used across both streams. And there's an additional 7 scorecards that will be used on acre CP only. They're all available on the website at this address, and I'll run through them in more detail now in a minute. But the scorecard data will be hugely beneficial for targeting suitable actions and measuring improvements over the course of the scheme. And I suppose that's where we want to be. We want to see improvement from year 1 to year 5, ideally. So these are the scorecards. All scorecards are designed to deliver for biodiversity, carbon sequestration, water quality, flood resilience, and fire resilience. So those things are just kind of built into all the scorecards. For the peatland scorecard then, additionally, peatland habitats and upland birds are targeted. Grassland targets semi-natural grassland habitats and pollinators in particular. The rough grazing targets hen harrier, barn owl, and small birds and mammals particularly. Scrub woodland deals with scrub and woodland habitats. Winterage then is dry calcareous grassland on winterage sites. The low input peat grassland targets wet grassland habitats in specific locations. The coastal, obviously, coastal habitats such as dunes and salt marshes, and there's a breeding wader card as well, and that targets your snipe, curlew, redshank, and lapwing. And the chough card targets your cliff habitats and chough, and your corncrake card targets corncrake and hay meadows. So you can see we have a lot of assets that we want to target, and because this is a national scheme, there are a number of scorecards. The advisors nominate parcels for the use of the grassland or low input peat grassland scorecards for acres general, as you're aware. And then scorecards are assigned to fields by the CP teams in acre CP areas using aerial photography. The scorecards may be locked. If they're not locked, then alternatives may be available. So, for example, peatland, scrub woodland, grassland, and rough grazing will often have alternatives when you go out in the field, because it's impossible to get it 100% right from aerial photography. When you walk into a field that looked to us to be grassland, it might be more appropriate to use the peatland card or vice versa, and we just need that flexibility. And then things like the low input peat grassland, there are alternatives. You might be using the peatland or the scrub woodland card if they're more appropriate. For the winterage, in a very small number of cases, you might be selecting alternatives. For the coastal, the chough, the breeding wader, and the corncrake, there are no alternatives. And then something that hasn't been used much, but might be used, is the area not scoreable. And if you go out in the field and it should be scored, then you can select those as options as well. I suppose it's important to mention as well that even though there are 10 scorecards, the first 4 there, your peatland, your scrub woodland, your grassland, and your rough grazing, are the ones that will be used over 90% of the time. And then, of course, if you've got farms and clients in more specific areas, you might be using more of them. This is a 7-hectare farm, and this is just the GLAM map, and you can see there are 7 fields within that farm, and they've all been assigned to the grassland scorecard. So this is how it will look on GLAM when it is available to you. The different scorecards should have different color coding when you can see it as well, hopefully from next week. So as I mentioned, the vast majority of fields will be assigned grassland, rough grazing, or peatland scorecards. And then a small proportion will be assigned scrub woodland, but it will be common because it will commonly occur in these H&B areas. But most other cards will have a very small footprint, so you don't need to start sweating about having to use 10 cards. Most people won't ever have to use 10 cards. So the winterage scorecards will apply in the Burren CP area only. The chough scorecards will apply in the chough SPA in Sligo and Leitrim, and a very small number of coastal cliff sites after that. The corncrake scorecards will apply on islands and coastal areas in Donegal, Galway and Mayo only. And the breeding wader scorecards will apply on grassland fields with a high likelihood of breeding wader presence only. The coastal scorecards will apply to farms with coastal land only, and the low input peat grassland has a very limited footprint in acre CP, and it's the least assigned scorecard based on Aidan's data that you saw earlier as well. So this is what the scorecard looks like. Maybe you've already had a look at them. I'm just going to go through the structure of them, and but they're all 2 pages and they're all set up the same way. So they all have an ecological integrity section, and this section will primarily gain marks for the farmer. For most of the grassland cards, the number of positive indicators, the abundance of positive indicators, and the vegetation structure will garner most of the marks. And for the peatland fields, the number of positive indicators, the abundance of mosses and lichens in particular, and the vegetation structure will garner most of the marks. And then some cards have a hydrological integrity section if the wetness of the habitat is integral to its health. So those would be peatland, low input grass on peat, and scrub woodland cards. This section also gains marks on the scorecard, and it just really highlights the fact that wetter is better. So the images there are sphagnum moss, it's one of the key indicators on your peatland, and your devil's bit scabious, yellow flag iris, and what you might be noticing in the landscape at the moment, as you drive around, is the ragged robin. They are all very positive indicators on the low input grassland on peat. So you'll be coming across them regularly in acres general as well. All scorecards have a threats and pressures section as well. And I suppose this is the section that the farmer can gain most on if any of these threats and pressures are present. So addressing these will be one of the easiest ways of improving your score. This assesses the active threats to the ecological integrity, such as the presence of invasive alien plants, the threats to water quality, or damaging activities such as dumping. The section has 0 values unless the threat or pressure is present, except for bare soil, which gains 10 marks. And again, just the 10 marks there for bare soil is because well-vegetated areas are key to delivering a lot of ecosystem services that we want to be seeing. Turbary on peatland is an exception as well, as it gains 10 marks if absent. And there are some examples of damaging activities. Got an awful lot of bare soil due to track marks there on the left, some rhododendron and self-sown conifers, and on the right there we've got an awful lot of poaching, and unfortunately that poaching is directly next to a pathway, which Paddy will talk about a lot more in the next presentation. So just looking at ecological integrity again, this section gains the most marks for the field, typically around 90% of the marks, but there are different weightings for different sections, and the different weightings are very important. So for example, the weighting for the positive indicators and abundance of positive indicators is 50% of marks on the grassland card, but only 20% of marks on the rough grazing card. But the weightings for the vegetation structure then is 25% on the grassland card compared to 40% on the rough grazing card. So your grassland card will do better for species-rich semi-natural grasslands, where your rough grazing might be more appropriate for your lesser species-rich fields that have a lot of rush cover in particular. And this reflects the objective of the different scorecards. For example, it's biodiversity and pollinators for grassland, and so the more flowering plants, the better. But it's small bird and mammal habitat and raptor prey source for the rough grazing. So the focus is a little bit more on the nesting areas that are provided by the field. This is just a quick overview of the different sections as they vary from the grassland card. So the rough grazing scorecard has double weighting for field boundaries, and it also has a scrub diversity and structure assessment, which isn't on the grassland card. The coastal scorecard has a bare substrate assessment for fixed dunes, mockhair and salt marsh, because that's particularly important for those habitats. The chough scorecard has a landscape elements assessment, and again, that just takes into account these elements that are very important for the chough, which relies a lot on invertebrate populations for food in the landscape. The breeding wader scorecard, unsurprisingly, has a wet features and hydrology assessment question, because the wetter the better for the breeding waders, and pond or damper features in those fields will be beneficial for them. And then the corncrake scorecard has a hay meadow structure assessment and an early late cover assessment. And again, those things are crucial for the corncrake, and that's why they're there. All scorecards have a threats and pressures section, and all assessments consider threats to water quality, bare soil and erosion, non-native invasive plants, and any additional damaging activities. And the way the scorecard is set up, B1 or C1, depending on the card, looks at damaging activities. But the better order really to ensure that you get the right score is to consider B2 or C2, the water quality question first, then consider the bare soil, then the non-native invasives, and the last thing to consider would be the damaging activities. So the order would be different ideally, but it's a bit late in the day to be changing those things. But you can still change the order in which you consider them in the field very easily. So as I said, this is the ideal order to consider them when scoring a field to avoid double hitting fields. For example, a small area of bare soil that is impacting water quality is a water quality issue only, whereas a large area of bare soil may warrant a negative score in 2 sections. And that's kind of the best way to approach it. And the guidance should give you good pointers on how to make that decision. Cards used on grassland consider the extent of spreading, immature scrub and bracken cover additional to those 4 damaging activities or 4 threats that you assess. And then the cards on peatland consider the impact of turbary also. So that's unique to peatland. The extent of gorse scrub and bracken cover are also assessed, but they don't garner a negative score. It's just informational for the CP teams. So for example, scrub can be quite positive, but if we get a scorecard back that says there's a very high cover of gorse scrub on a site, then we can go out and have a look and consider, is it damaging the hydrology and should it be removed in conjunction with other landscape actions like drain blocking. So the guidance document will outline all of the above in more detail and will be available in the next few days. Some minor edits are being made following field testing, so just making sure that the flow of things when you're using them in the field are correct and that questions that may arise in the field are answered in that guidance. Scorecards are designed to be straightforward to use, and the field training will cover methods for walking the field and the 4 main scorecards, your peatland, grassland, rough grazing and scrub woodland. If you carefully read the text of the question, refer often to the guidance, especially in the first few farms, and the tip sheets, you'll arrive at the right score. Specialist training will be provided on the other scorecards, targeting the advisors who will be using them most. So there's no need to invite everyone to a coastal scorecard training session if 97% of people won't be using it. And I suppose I can't emphasize this point enough. Contact the CP teams if you want additional support in the field at any stage. So you'll all have some direct contact with the CP teams through the field training, and do use that as an opportunity to make links and to keep those links going over the field season. Because the time to ask questions is the first couple of weeks in the field. Make sure that you're assessing things correctly. Asking something in July and realizing that you were doing it slightly wrong for the previous 6 weeks is just going to be frustrating for you and possibly your farmer clients. You should be field ready for after field training, but we understand that this is new for everyone and it will take a little bit of time to get into our strides. So the CP teams are here to assist throughout the summer, and we hope to make sure that you get through what we understand is a big job of work over the next 12 weeks or so. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. An excellent overview of, I suppose, the nuances that are in the individual scorecards. Again, as you're highlighting, there's a lot of work for advisors to get their head around and to get fully up to speed and stride in the field to keep pace going. And I guess the important thing is it's starting as soon as possible once we get the scorecard app out there coming the 9th of June.